Hello guys, so this is going to be my first podcast and I hope you enjoy. And today we're going to be talking about what I think is one of the most important parts of mountain biking and one that will come up a lot, and it's really wide, really varied, but it's also super important. And that is, well, you know by the thumbnail and the title, but it's the price. It's something that affects every aspect of mountain biking, from how much you're willing to spend on your suspension to carbon versus aluminum versus steel and just everything. So let's get this up straight first. Mountain biking is expensive. We all know that. Yes, there is a lot of ways to start cheaper, and you don't have to spend all your money on a $20,000 pivot first time you mountain bike, but it's expensive. So in this podcast, I'm going to show you how to spend your money wisely, maybe decide where to spend some money, where to cut back a little bit, and decide what you really need. I just want to get one thing up straight, is that this is all in Canadian dollars. So, yeah. So the first thing we're going to look at is different experience levels. Obviously, if you're just starting, you don't need the same bike that's being ridden at EWS and World Cups. They have the best tech, and that's going to cost a lot. And you can buy that tech, but yeah, it's going to cost you a lot of money. For example, here, I have this Pivot Firebird Team XTR with a Fox Podium fork, a Fox Live Valve Neo electric shock, so all the fancy stuff. And this is around $20,000. I'm not saying I have anything against all these expensive bikes. And the pros, yeah, they need them, and it's going to give you marginal time gains, but I'm not saying that I have anything against high-priced bikes. I'm not saying I hate low-priced bikes. I'm just saying that depending on your skill level, you're obviously going to need a different bike. So when I talk about skill levels, what am I saying really? So you have beginner, intermediate, advanced, and you have expert, and everything beyond that where you're just really good. And what I see a lot, and there's nothing wrong with it, is people spending more money than they actually need, and there's really nothing wrong with that. And it's pretty well known that it's the rider, not the bike. So yeah, is Jackson Goldstone gonna beat you unless you're a World Cup racer, which I'm very happy that you're watching my podcast. But Jackson Goldstone would beat you on a trail bike with Fox Rhythm, whereas you on your Enduro bike with Fox factory suspension, Fox Podium. So yeah. Really, at the end of the day, it's the rider's skill. Of course, I'm talking within the ballpark. Obviously, if you're using aftermarket parts from Temu, that's one thing versus Fox Factory versus Fox Performance Elite, and same goes for RockShox. I'll just use Fox for these examples for the suspension, but it's more about suspension as well. So I'm just going to give a little baseline. I would say that maybe $2,000, maybe a bit more, is about the lowest that you can get away with. Of course, you can get cheaper, and expensive doesn't always mean better. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think just the lowest that you can get reasonably without sacrificing tons of performance reliability is around $2,000, $3,000. The lowest you typically find on a pretty big site like Commensal or Specialized is around $4,000, and you get Rhythm usually, NX Eagle, maybe GX Eagle, but yeah, it depends also on the price and if it's on sale. But how much should you really be spending if you want to be reasonable? So this is different for everybody. If you're rich, of course, and you have tons of money and you don't care at all about how much you can spend on a bike, then go ahead, spend your money on the most expensive bike that you find. And as long as the bike is the right choice for you, it'll be awesome. Heck, it'll be really cool. And everybody will be amazed when they see your new bike with all your tech. And yeah, it'll ride awesome, because even though it's smaller gains as you get up the price scale, of course there's exceptions, but it's gonna still ride awesome. So I'd say for a beginner, don't spend anything crazy, and beginners aren't doing this usually. Like if you're a beginner, obviously you're not going to spend thousands of dollars on a mountain bike, I'd say you start with a hardtail, because hardtails are just great. And when I said before that the lowest price I'd go, like $3,000, is for a full suspension bike, hardtails you can go much, much lower, like $1,000 for a good solid hardtail. So if you've never started but you want something super reliable, I'd go with a hardtail for sure. And I'd go for something around $1,000, $2,000, maybe even $3,000 if you're looking for a high performance hardtail. But high performance hardtails aren't really for the beginners; they're more for intermediate and riders who love hardtails. But yeah, so if you're a beginner, buy the hardtail that has good components. I'm not saying that you need to get something from a massive brand like Fox or RockShox. Get something with good components. Obviously, if you're getting it from which I'd recommend getting it from a reputable dealer like Marin, Common Sol, like all those that make good bikes. I'm not saying that smaller brands, anything. Just get a real bike brand. Don't get it off Temu, Amazon, or anything like that. And then once you're past that, you own a full suspension bike, you can spend some more money. Hopefully you really like mountain biking. And yeah, $3,000, it's pretty good. Yeah, so that's really what I think is reasonable if you're starting as a beginner. Past then, you can start to, once you realize what you kind of like, and you can spend some more money, and I will cover that later. But also, are there any types of bikes that cost more? And by types, I mean categories like downhill, cross-country, all that stuff. Well, I'll tell you. So this isn't fully accurate, but this is mainly what I think. So starting cross-country, I'll say this: the higher cross-country bikes, the higher the price, and that's the same for all bikes, but cross-country, the super high-end ones are usually the priciest, because cross-country, that's like, if you're buying World Cup spec, that's where they pour tons and tons of money into the lightest you can possibly be, versus something like a trail bike, like a good solid trail bike. That trail bikes aren't really racy, but if you buy something like a specialized stump jumper, like even the higher up ones, they don't cost as insane as a 20-pound super light cross-country bike. And yeah, so generally race bikes and the ones that actually have race-ready components that are used by pros, those ones are going to cost the most. So then as we move along, I think the bike that has the best value is probably the park bike. And by park, I mean the dual crown downhill bike that isn't meant for racing. Just the one that you take the bike park, you flick it around, you bomb some technical trails, that one. And the reason why is they're almost always aluminum. I don't know why you'd make a park bike out of carbon, but I'm not saying I have anything against this. I'm just saying, and usually you can find them for a lower spec, because that's what they're designed for. They're designed for someone who isn't going to spend $10,000, and they're just for someone who really wants to have a good time, have a solid bike that can handle stuff, like really technical stuff, big jumps. And yeah, that comes at an advantage, because even if you don't have the highest end suspension, you have like 200 millimeters, which is a lot. And that's generally what I think of the categories. So I think just for someone who's intermediate, I'd go for a all-mountain bike. But this is more about value. All-mountain bikes are pretty great. Usually aluminum that you could get a good all-mountain bike on. And yeah, something like the YT Jeffsy. I know YT is having a big crisis right now, but that's just an example, like aluminum, good parts, and that's just what I'm saying. Okay, moving past bike parks and bike types and getting into suspension and tires and brakes and all that stuff. So the components. I'll start with suspension because it's the most obvious. Get a good suspension fork, and it's pretty much the same as the super high-end ones. Like, especially if you get something like Performance Elite or Select Plus and RockShox, like that is like factory or ultimate, but just a little bit heavier. So yeah. And that's on suspension. But obviously the more you spend on suspension, the better it will be, the better it will feel, but it's not necessarily a gain for like an intermediate or like an advanced rider, like Performance Elite or something like that. Yeah, it's really not much of a difference between something at the higher ends. This is just my opinion, remember, but I'm just trying to help anybody who's kind of stuck and trying to decide like, oh, I got this new bike, is it worth it? So moving on to tires. Tires are kind of a simple one. If the tubeless tires, obviously, you'd want to get those tires to get. And right now we kind of moved past the beginner, but tubeless tires, yeah, you want to get them. Usually like $80 to $120 to get for a tire. So, yeah, you have to spend a bit on tires, and you do have to replace them, like, every season if you ride aggressively. They'll last a bit longer, especially in the front if you don't ride it as aggressively. But tires, you don't want to cheap out on. They're super good. They're your main contact point to the ground. In fact, they're the only contact point to the ground. So, you want to spend good on the thing that's keeping you and the bike onto the trail. Moving on to components, this is a big one. Just like components, I'll just talk over like stems and cranks for this part. Aluminum versus carbon. I'd say go aluminum, but carbon ones are also great. Aluminum is generally more robust, and yeah, carbon cracks. Though carbon is super strong, they're both super strong. Aluminum is heavier, but especially with handlebars, they can have other ergonomic benefits. Like, I know carbon has better vibration dampening. But honestly, if you're just in a bind, like, especially wheels, like, that's a big part. But I think for something like handlebars, if you don't really think about your handlebars, if you're not just, like, riding down and just like, oh, my handlebars, and, feeling it really in tune with your bike, just go aluminum. It's lightweight. It's solid, it's robust, it's pretty much the choice that you'd want. Carbon handlebars especially, they can be pretty nice, and they're not insanely expensive. Like, carbon handlebars like $150 to $250. So if you just want to prove one thing your bike to make it like a high quality bike, I'd go handlebars. Cranks, go aluminum. Unless you're an XC rider or like a trail rider, or you just want the lightest possible, just go aluminum. I'm not going to go too deep into those. But even SRAM's XO, which is like super expensive, uses aluminum cranks because that's like the standard for Enduro. Just solid, lightweight, robust. Just go aluminum. Next, moving on to wheels. Wheels are a big one because carbon and aluminum are quite different. They're both amazing. So you might want to check this out, check what suits your riding style. But carbon wheels are expensive, like $2,000. So choose wisely, but you can't go wrong with either one. Next, moving on to a really big one, like a more hidden one for people that are more just entering in the world of components. I'm a components guy, check everything. That's why I'm making my podcast, is drivetrains. Yes, drivetrains. The rear mech, the group set, shifters. So here you have another big choice. You have electric versus non-electric. For the most part, it's like a big debate. I don't know, like, electric is more expensive, but they're, like, lower-end electric. Well, not lower-end. They're still it's expensive, like, GXX. It's expensive. But I don't know on this point. You gotta choose what you like here. But I know a lot of people, they don't prefer the Advantage for the extra price, and a lot of people just do think it's amazing. But I think go the like high end bike part, but like lower on the spectrum, electric if you want electric, because electric is amazing. And like what I mean by that, don't go XX, go GX if you know SRAM and what I'm talking about, or go Shimano XT Dior Di2. And yeah, you really can't go wrong with that. They're a bit heavier, but you can replace the chain, and like small upgrades like that really make a difference, and I'll talk about that later. And then for the actual non-electric, you got a ton of choices here. You don't want to go too low, but you also don't want to spend. It's easier to overspend on electric than it is on mechanical. You can get really solid mechanical. So I'd say if you go mechanical, go for a solid one, because it will be like electric. It will be super, super shiftable. Shiftable, is that even a word? Shiftable. It will just be nice. So go for a higher end one. Obviously, don't spend all your money on this like mechanical drivetrain of the future. But that's just my take. So now that you have an idea on bikes and how much to spend, I hope that you learned upon this. And I'll be making another one more into the some other things like carbon versus aluminum for the frames and all that. But for now, I hope this has given you a baseline idea, and if this helps, it means a lot to me if you'd like and subscribe. So thank you, and more videos coming soon and more podcasts, so stay tuned.